Elena stepped into the dusty barn and paused, letting her eyes adjust to the dim light that filtered through the wooden slats. She heard birds chirping somewhere in the distance, and the familiar smell of motor oil and worn leather brought a faint smile to her lips. It had been years since she'd stood in this exact place. The sight of the old, sun-faded car tarp in the center of the creaking floorboards sent a wave of memories rushing back. She remembered sneaking in here with him, her best friend from childhood, on humid summer days after they'd escaped chores, their laughter echoing against the rafters as they dreamed up adventures behind the wheel. Now she was alone, but maybe not for long. She ran her hand over the worn edge of a workbench, a swirl of dust dancing in the sunbeam. There was so much to do, and the reason for her return was both an obligation and, surprisingly, a hope for a second chance. Outside, the day was crisp and golden as she propped the barn doors open for better light. She turned back to the dormant car, still hidden beneath its dusty shroud. Her heart thumped heavier than usual as she inhaled slowly and stepped toward it. She pulled the tarp away in one quick motion, revealing a vintage 1967 Mustang. The once glorious red paint had chipped and faded to near pink in places, and the interior needed more than just a little tender care. Yet as her hand slid over the hood, she could practically hear the roar of its engine from those long ago days. A rush of excitement crackled inside her, the same feeling from when she was 17 and convinced she could do anything. She'd come here at the request of the local charity committee. The car needed to be restored for their annual race fundraiser, and someone had to coax the old metal back to life. Elena folded the tarp and set it aside, trotting carefully around the car. She cataloged each dent, each patch of rust, each battered meter of vinyl. She found herself smiling without thinking, because every little imperfection reminded her of her teenage years. Long drives, late nights, stolen moments of joy. Then she heard footsteps on the gravel outside. Her spine tingled as that old familiar presence washed over her, and a flicker of both trepidation and anticipation lit her eyes. She recognized the low hum of footsteps before he even stepped inside. Nick entered, pushing the barn door fully open with a gentle shove. He filled the space like a memory made real. His dark hair still curled at the ends, albeit shorter than she remembered. He wore a t-shirt stained with engine grease, and his boots kicked up a swirl of dust across the floor. For a moment, neither spoke. They just stood there, a foot of empty air between them, gazing with the frankness that only comes from a decade of shared history and nearly as many years spent apart. She found her voice first, forcing herself to sound casual. "You haven't changed much," she said, "except the hair's gone shorter." He cracked a small grin, nodding toward the Mustang with humble reverence. "You kept her safe all these years, I see." "Well, mostly. She's looking a bit tired." A wave of heat crept up her neck, remembering the last time they'd talked. It ended in an argument after high school graduation when she decided to leave town. She'd never properly said goodbye. They hadn't ended things maliciously, exactly, but they hadn't parted on friendly terms either. Now, after all this time, she mustered a nod. She needed a rest, but the charity race is next month. They said we're the only ones who know this car inside and out, so here we are. Nick's gaze flickered, landing on Elena's face. "Here we are," he repeated softly, acknowledging years of unsaid words. Then, with a gentle shrug, he walked over to the Mustang and pressed his palm against the hood. The tension, albeit awkward, didn't obscure the flicker in his eyes. He looked as if he, too, was recalling old joys. "I guess we should get started," he said, softly enough that she almost missed it. They set themselves to work, first removing corroded parts and listing out what needed replacing. The mechanical tasks gave them both a welcome excuse to avoid sensitive topics. Elena focused on the engine, carefully unbolting the carburetor. Meanwhile, Nick inspected the tires, taking notes on a grease-stained notepad. Eventually, though, the silence began to weigh on them. The barn was too full of Echo's memories, nearly tangible. They both sensed it. "So," he ventured when the quiet got too thick, "I heard you came back from Chicago. How was it there?" His voice betrayed a cautious curiosity, as if he wanted to ask thousands of questions but was settling for one. She kept her gaze steady on the engine. It was, she paused, busy. I got a job at a marketing firm after college, then realized city life wasn't all it was cracked up to be. So I came home, he nodded. I see, good to have you back. His tone was earnest, and her heart skipped at its sincerity. They worked well into the afternoon, stripping the old seats, checking the transmission, taking measurements for new parts. When they took their first break, beads of sweat shimmered on their foreheads as they sat on the barn's front step with bottles of water. Elena marveled at how Nick's presence had quickly begun to feel comforting, the old tension replaced by a strange, shy camaraderie. It's funny, she said in a low voice as she looked beyond the gravel driveway to the open field. I spent so long away thinking I needed something bigger, faster, like the hustle would make me feel alive. But now, being here, I'm realizing this place was always home. Nick didn't speak right away. He glanced at her profile. She felt his gaze, and it sent a small, pleasant shiver down her spine. Sometimes, he said, turning his stare to the horizon, we don't understand what we have until we try to leave it behind. She nodded, pressing her lips together in gratitude for the unspoken acceptance in his words. All these years, she'd dreaded returning, half expecting to be unwelcome. Yet Nick was still Nick, a steady rock in the storm. She'd once counted on him so fervently it scared her. Maybe that was why she'd run in the first place. They resumed work, and while tinkering, they traded quips and laughter in that old, effortless fashion. She discovered how easily they fell back into inside jokes, as if the intervening years were just a chapter break in a long story. The hours passed in a heartbeat, and they only stopped when dusk blanketed the barn. Elena lit a hanging lantern, and the soft glow felt intimate, highlighting the ridges in Nick's cheekbones and the gentle concern in his gaze. We should probably wrap up, Nick said as he set aside a socket wrench. We've got a new day ahead. This old girl's got more hidden problems. I can feel it. He swung his arms to loosen his shoulders, looking pointedly at the car. Elena exhaled and nodded, not quite ready to leave his company, but forced by the approaching night. When the barn doors closed behind them, she felt a reluctance that resonated with her teenage self, the version of her that lingered on doorsteps for a few extra minutes. They parted ways with little more than a wave, but as she watched him disappear into the darkness, a flutter of promise rose in her chest. The next day, Elena returned early, a tray of coffee cups balanced in one hand. She wanted to keep the good momentum going, both for the car's sake and for the fragile threads of reconnection weaving between them. She half expected to be alone for a while, but Nick was already there. He was lying on his back under the Mustang, fiddling with the undercarriage. The sight of his tools resting neatly by his side brought a surge of nostalgia. She remembered him being so passionate about cars and how they worked, the unique hum of a well-tuned engine. It had been his dream to open a small restoration shop in their hometown. The fact he was here, doing precisely that in a small, personal way, made her heart clench with a bittersweet ache. "Morning," she said, offering him a coffee as he slid out from under the car. "You beat me here?" He grinned, taking the cup. "I barely slept. Kept thinking about what needed to be done. Figured I'd get a head start." He took a sip. "Thanks." She joined him, crouching beside the Mustang to examine the undercarriage. "I can't believe we're doing this for a charity race. Do you think we can fix it in time?" "Yeah," he replied, sounding confident as he took a big gulp of coffee. "We've got a month. It'll be tight, but we'll manage." Side by side, they worked through the day, cleaning the fuel system, polishing the metal. Elena studied Nick's meticulous care with admiration. He guided her hands through the trickier parts, occasionally brushing against her fingers. Their closeness became tangible, electric. She noticed how the hairs on his forearms stood on end whenever their knees bumped. It made her stomach flutter in a heady way she hadn't felt since they were teenagers. As days turned to a week, the Mustang slowly revived. They replaced the tires, installed new seats upholstered in a sleek black vinyl, and touched up the paint until it gleamed a thrilling, nostalgic red. Every hour they spent together added new strokes to a portrait that had once been incomplete. Their conversation moved beyond casual banter in hushed tones. After the school bus had passed by or an old neighbor had dropped in for a quick hello, Elena told Nick about her life in Chicago, her job, her senior marketing position, her slow realization that she was lonely despite success. He listened intently, occasionally placing a comforting hand on her arm. In turn, he revealed how he'd stayed in town to help look after his ailing grandmother. He explained the tough times, how the local auto shop where he'd worked shut down. He lingered on regrets and unspoken dreams. Together, they found a tenderness in the act of simply hearing each other out, acknowledging missteps, and forging a new path forward. Late one evening, after the day's work was done, Nick invited Elena to drive out to the old hill they used to frequent in high school. The car was in running condition, though not yet fully restored. The engine roared to life under Nick's skilled guidance as they rumbled onto the open road. Wind blasted through the open windows, carrying away any lingering awkwardness. Elena's laughter came free and easy, floating into the twilight air. She felt an excitement she hadn't known in years, reacquainting herself with the squeak of the old gear shift and the comforting rumble beneath her feet. When they reached the hilltop, Nick killed the engine and they climbed out to admire the spread of stars above them. A gentle breeze rustled the trees. Elena hugged her arms close to her body, half from the chill and half from the memories. Countless nights spent up here, talking about what the future might hold. "It's nice to be back," she said, her voice hushed with awe. "Even if it's different, there's a sense of belonging." Nick took a step closer, his voice equally gentle. "I always wondered how you were doing. I tried to follow your path a few times, but I never reached out. I thought you wouldn't want to hear from me. Or maybe I was scared." She tilted her head toward him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I felt the same way. I was afraid you'd move on, that I wouldn't be welcome, that I'd messed up by leaving." He shook his head slowly. "I never stopped caring about you. Sometimes I wished you'd stayed, but I also knew you needed to see the world. You always had bigger dreams." Her breath caught. The closeness between them shimmered with possibility. She could sense an unspoken question beneath his words, a question that mirrored one in her own heart. Could the broken pieces of what they once had become something new, something stronger? He lifted his hand, fingering a loose strand of hair near her cheek. The hush wrapped them in perfect intimacy, and her face warmed at his touch. She closed her eyes briefly, savoring a moment she'd never really let herself imagine again. "Nick," she began, unsure how to complete the sentence. A flurry of emotions swirled, longing, regret, affection. But the words didn't need to form. He sensed it too, and in that quiet minute, he leaned in. Their lips met in the softest of kisses, tasting like memory and rebirth all at once. Surprise melted into acceptance, and then into a rush of heat. She placed her hand gently on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his body relax. For an instant, the past dissolved, and they were just two people discovering a deep connection under a canopy of stars. When they finally pulled away, the tenderness lingered. Elena's heart pounded with the magnitude of what had just happened. She searched Nick's face and found it mirroring her own sense of wonder. A silent vow passed between them, unspoken but unmistakable. They both sensed that this was a chance they didn't want to let slip away. They drove back in near silence, the hum of the Mustang's engine more soothing than any words. By the time Nick dropped her off, they exchanged a parting smile charged with hope. Neither wanted to press for definitions or promises just yet. It was enough to acknowledge that something was stirring. In the final days leading up to the charity race, their pace became frantic. Posters around town announced the big event, proclaiming a series of races to raise money for the community center's renovation fund. Local enthusiasts popped by the barn to offer advice or admire the duo's handiwork. Excitement buzzed, mixed with the pressure of the looming deadline. Elena and Nick worked long hours, skipping lunch, spending late nights checking every nut and bolt. The car's new coat of paint shone like a beacon of pride, a symbol of their renewed bond and shared effort. One late afternoon, while Elena was polishing the side mirrors, Nick emerged from behind the hood with a bright grin. "I've just finished tuning the engine," he announced, wiping sweat from his brow. "She's purring perfectly." She flashed a triumphant smile. "Okay, let's take her out for a test spin before tomorrow's race, just to be sure." They climbed inside, the seats firm and smooth. Nick turned the ignition key and the engine roared to life in a symphony of mechanical perfection. Elena whooped in excitement, and Nick revved the gas lightly, a grin spreading from ear to ear. Pulling out onto the rural road, they embraced the power under the hood, each curve of the asphalt a testament to the hours of work and the emotional investment poured into the project. When they returned to the barn, adrenaline still hummed in Elena's veins. They hopped out, and she couldn't resist throwing her arms around Nick in a warm, spontaneous hug. He froze for just a split second before returning it, the shared energy of the moment passing between them in a charged current. Neither spoke, but as Elena pressed her cheek to his chest, she heard his heart pounding as fiercely as her own. She thought about the two people they once were, the young dreamers who parted ways. Here they stood, older and uncertain, but with hearts open to the possibility of a new beginning. The next morning, the sun rose on the day of the charity race. Dozens of vintage cars lined up at the local fairgrounds, their polished exteriors reflecting the excited spectators who formed a colorful sea. Booths offered homemade pies and lemonade, kids tugged on their parents' sleeves, and a local band played uplifting tunes. It was a carnival of community spirit. Elena looked around, a pleasant ache spreading in her chest. She was thrilled to be part of it, to contribute to something that truly mattered. Nick was making last-minute checks of the Mustang's engine. He wore a new pair of work gloves and shot Elena a grin. "She's ready," he announced with a nod of pride. They took their position at the starting line, hearts pounding in unison. The race wasn't about speed alone. It was more of a friendly competition, a parade of passion for classic cars. Still, the adrenaline soared the moment the signal was given. Engines revved, tires squealed, and the cars shot forward. Nick handled the steering wheel masterfully, guiding the Mustang around corners with a deftness that spoke of deep familiarity with its every quirk. Elena navigated the route, occasionally calling out turns while stealing glances at Nick's focused expression. Every time his gaze flicked to hers, a thrill shot through her. Cheers and applause roared from the crowd as they completed each lap. In that moment, Elena felt more alive than she had in years. Her voice mingled with Nick's laughter and the rumble of the engine, and it seemed like the best kind of symphony. The day's heat radiated through the open windows, tangling with the rush of the wind. By the race's end, Elena and Nick cruised across the finish line in a swirl of dust and triumph. They weren't the fastest car, but that hardly mattered. The cause was bigger than winning, and they'd made a statement that warmed every onlooker's heart. When they finally parked the Mustang, a wave of cheers and clapping greeted them. The announcer praised their teamwork and thanked them for restoring a piece of the town's history. Nick hopped out first, reaching a hand up to help Elena. As her feet hit the ground, she saw the admiration in the bystanders' expression, but more importantly, she saw the tenderness in Nick's eyes. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and pulled her into a spontaneous, joy-filled embrace. She let out a breathless laugh, and they rocked slightly in each other's arms, the loudspeakers blaring celebration around them. With applause echoing in her ears, she couldn't help the tears that pricked the edges of her vision. It felt like they'd not only restored a car, but also resurrected a bond that was even richer for the time and distance between them. After the ceremony and the speeches, the crowd began to disperse. The organizers were delighted with the event's success, and Elena and Nick could finally relax. They steadied themselves against the Mustang's gleaming side, eyes locked on one another. Their moment felt suspended in the late afternoon glow. I guess we did it, Elena said softly, her pulse tingling. Nick nodded. We did. Together. He glanced around, then back to her, his expression turning contemplative. You know, we never really talked about what happens next. Her breath caught. She looked down, heart thudding. I wasn't sure if I could stay, she admitted. I got used to city life, but being back doing this with you, I'm starting to think maybe this is where I belong. He slid closer, reaching for her hand. I won't rush you, he said. I just want you to know that I'm here. And this time, if you ever feel the urge to leave again, at least let me know where you're going. Or maybe, he added with a searching gaze, you'll let me come with you. The tears that had been threatening finally spilled free. She laughed softly, brushing them away. Her heart swelled, not just with affection for him, but also with the reassurance that she really did have a choice this time, to follow a new path without fear, nurtured by the lessons of the past. I'd like that, she managed, voice trembling with emotion. He leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. So would I. Their families and friends extended warm congratulations, and the entire fairground felt bathed in an optimistic glow. Local photographers snapped pictures of the newly restored Mustang, immortalizing it in the town's memory. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Nick and Elena found themselves seated on the hood of the car, sharing a plate of fries from a food stand. They said little, content in the comfortable silence of two souls who had rediscovered each other. At the end of the evening, they drove back in unhurried fashion, letting the warm summer breeze ruffle their hair. The star-strewn sky reminded them of that night on the hill. Once they reached the barn, Nick shut off the engine, and they sat listening to the ticking sounds of the Mustang's cooling machinery. Elena's head nestled against Nick's shoulder, her arm looped around his. She drew lazy circles on the denim of his jeans, her heart content in the moment's simplicity. You know, he mused, resting his chin lightly on her hair. This car always meant more to us than just a ride. It was a symbol of our friendship, she smiled. And now it's a symbol of everything we've overcome, a brand new chapter. He gazed at her, love evident in his eyes. I'd like to see where it leads. Elena snuggled closer, a radiant spark in her chest. So would I, she whispered, the words trembling with every ounce of hope she felt. There, in the comforting hush of the barn that had once been a place of dusty memories, she and Nick found something new, a second chance not just for an old car, but for two people whose hearts had never truly given up on each other. They shared a tender kiss, one filled with quiet promise and fierce gratitude. The barn door stood open, letting in the mild night air as if symbolizing an invitation to a future that was waiting just beyond. The Mustang gleamed in the lantern light, a testament to resilience, to collaboration, and to the spark of love that can be rekindled when two old friends rediscover what they once had, only stronger. When the last lantern was extinguished, Alina and Nick walked out of the barn hand in hand, stepping into the welcoming embrace of the night. The vintage car remained behind them, but the bond it helped reignite lingered close. A new dawn would come soon enough, bringing with it the promise of more laughter, a deepening connection, and the warmth of the community they both called home. And as they strolled away from the familiar building, their fingers interlaced in a newly forged commitment. The distant whir of crickets and the gentle rustle of trees provided the sweetest of lullabies, a whispered approval for a love that was finally ready to shine.